Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on this great panel we've assembled for our Open Mainframe Virtual Summit this year. I think you're going to enjoy it. We've got some real personalities on here. I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to kick into kind of where we've been and where we're going. Our best guest, anyway. In the world of mainframes, open mainframe, DevOps and mainframes, etc. I'm going to introduce first, and if I mispronounce anyone's names, I apologize. I do the best I can. And I'm going to introduce these people and give them a chance to give their own background, their companies, and everything else. Let's start with Peter Wassel. Why don't you start off for us, Peter, if you don't mind?
Sure thing, Alan. And first of all, thanks for having me. My name is Peter Wassel. I'm with Broadcom Mainframe Software Division. I joined Broadcom last summer, switched jobs during the pandemic, if you can imagine that. My role within Broadcom MSD is I am the Director of Product Management for our DevOps solution, Mainframe DevOps solution, as well as the work we're doing in the Open Mainframe Project Zoe project or Zoe community. We have an open mainframe value stream within Broadcom, and all the Broadcom value streams and products are rallying around that. My background is pretty varied. Started early career in mainframe, spent quite a bit of time with systems operation tooling, moved into application development tooling, and then spent quite a bit of time building out the cloud using microservices and container technologies. So I'm back to my roots, back to mainframe. Pretty excited about it.
It's a great journey. Thanks, Peter. Next up, I want to introduce my friend Rosalind Radcliffe. Rosalind, of course, is a mainstay on my mainframe content, but I'm going to let her introduce herself. Rosalind?
Thank you. Happy to be here again. Rosalind Radcliffe, IBM Distinguished Engineer responsible for DevOps for Enterprise Systems. And as I think many of you listening probably already know, I spend most of my time working with clients, helping them do DevOps transformations, including the mainframe. But I'm also responsible for building our DevOps related capability. I mean, we know DevOps is culture and practice, but there are tools that support it. And I'm responsible for helping make sure ZOS is DevOpsable, as I put it.
Okay. DevOpsable. Steve Katz, you're up next. Why don't you go?
Sure. I'm a leader of product management at BMC for the app dev products. As probably many of you are aware, BMC, CompuWare joined BMC back in June, and we were excited about having a larger portfolio to help enable DevOps on the mainframe. My team's responsible for both the CompuWare mainstay products like Abandate, Expediter, FileAid, as well as some of our newer products, Topaz. And my background is maybe a little bit unique. I grew up outside of the mainframe for many years and joined CompuWare about 6 years ago. With a goal of trying to mainstream the mainframe and connect it in with DevOps processes and open source tools like Jenkins and Git. So it's been an exciting journey, especially to see the transformation over the last couple of years and the acceleration of those types of technologies and approaches on the mainframe.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for joining, Steve. Next up, we have Anna Murray. Anna, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks for having me, Alan. My name is Anna Murray. I am Director of Product Management for ASG Technologies. I've been with the company for about 1.5 years, and when I came on board, I took over the JCL management solutions with the express purpose of adding an Eclipse plugin and getting that into the tooling for the DevOps tool chain. And at the same time, built a partnership with CompuWare. So I've done some work with Steve to make sure that we were jointly promoting connectivity between our products to our customers. And then recently, in the last 6 months during the pandemic, took on more responsibility with our automation and orchestration solutions that also include the mainframe, right, to make sure that we're automating end-to-end value streams. And my background, I've always been in automation. So I started really doing installations and training, and then moved into documentation and QA and business analysis and product management and pretty much everything in the tool chain, the development process, right? Except writing code. So I've never been a programmer, but I've done pretty much everything else in the chain. And it's given me great perspective to help the different teams that are working through the process.
Anna, thank you. That's great. And then last but not least, we have Tim. Tim Wilgang, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Alan, for having me on this, and I really appreciate it. I've spent the majority of my career working on the mainframe and different roles, from developer, lead developer, architect, and currently at Rocket. I've been at Rocket for 15 years, and I'm a distinguished engineer and chief architect of everything we produce on the Z platform. So Rocket's been very involved, as many of you know, in porting open source to run within ZOS, and also with the Zoe project as one of its original creators and contributors. And we feel at Rocket that open source plays a big part in making the platform DevOpsable, to steal something Rosalind said. And so that's something we believe in, and are going to continue to invest our time and money in, just for platform preservation, as we understand our customers really need this. They want to be able to and can today drive modern DevOps processes on ZOS with the tooling, open source, and packages that are out there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tim. Wow, what a panel we have, guys. I got to tell you the truth, I'm a little starstruck. But let's jump right into things. So look, it's February of 2021, and we have just put in the rearview mirror a year like none of us have experienced in our lifetime, right? And not just in the mainframe world, in the whole world. This will go down as the year of COVID times. And, besides the untold heartache and loss of, 1 million, almost 2 million people, I think, worldwide dying from this terrible pandemic, and the economic loss of so many, industries and businesses closing and people losing their jobs. We in the tech industry were not, quite frankly, that hit, because we saw a run to digital transformation. Everything had to be digitized, and now, right? We had to start working remotely within 10 days, and that meant that we had to have connectivity and systems and functionality. Everything had to be either curbside pickup or delivered, and it created a lot of pressure, but it also accelerated this digital transformation. Probably anywhere from 4 to 10 years within the last year. For a lot of organizations, that meant moving to the cloud migration, right? Where prior to this, everyone had a little something on the cloud, but the overwhelming majority of organizations did not have anything mission critical really in the cloud. And that, a lot of that changed over the last year. We certainly saw more migration to the cloud. One would think that meant, well, maybe we were putting less on mainframes, but you'd probably be wrong, right? I think, who cares what I think? What do you guys think? So who wants to talk about, what 2020 meant for the mainframe community and the mainframe market? And all of you can jump in here, but who wants to go first?
Hey, Alan, I'll get us started.
Sure.
I think there's an interesting relationship between the cloud and the mainframe. When you look at it, from a news angle point of view, it's the new cool technology that gets the headlines, that gets a lot of the press. but it's really the proven technology that gets the job done, right? And obviously we're talking about the mainframe here. And there's so many critical assets that are on the mainframe, your code, your applications, your data. They've always been on the mainframe, right? The trick really, though, when it comes to transformation is how do you make those assets on the mainframe accessible by environments like cloud, right? If you look at some of the analyst studies, IDC is a good example. Transformational initiatives that are done successfully, clients are seeing 6 times better ROI when they transform and integrate their mainframe, right? But to make that possible, the real trick is making the mainframe behave or accessible just like any other platform, right? And that's where opening the mainframe to modern tools and practices, while still maintaining a high standard of security, is really going to ensure that the platform is viable for a long time to come. So as you look at integrating into the mainframe, I mean, a really good example is a CI/CD pipeline. We're talking about DevOps here, right? And you need an effective way to integrate the mainframe into that. I think this is where a tool like or a set of supporting technologies that are based on Zoe could come into play to facilitate that interoperability amongst the mainframe tools, as well as the off-platform tools. It really creates a powerful bridge.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
I'll add to that we did see in at least one case there was a big difference between certain situations where people hadn't invested in the mainframe versus others that had. And I agree that the modern tool chains in care and feeding into the developer experience, that made a differentiation in certain scenarios where people that had done that investment, they were able to adapt, they were able to have their mainframe support the business demands that were unique and unexpected given the COVID situation. So I do think it highlights the need to really put time and effort into what your development experience is, how you're connecting the mainframe into the rest of your ecosystem within your enterprise. And I also think there's a difference that we've seen with the companies that take an approach where they're not looking for an end-all be-all solution. They're making incremental steps to increasing value, increasing automation, and allowing them to ultimately release faster to their application changes out to be able to adapt to changes in the market.
Yeah.
I'll jump in for just a second. I just wanted to add that our customer base, we've been watching them closely, of course, and we saw a bunch of them just put on the brakes to getting off the mainframe. I think they started to realize they can't do that. Right? They finally realized that that's not necessarily the best plan for us. And so we've seen an acceleration actually of our customers outsourcing, moving their mainframes off their premises to companies like Insano, and moving out so they don't actually have it on-prem, but they still have their mainframe. They need their mainframe apps. They need their mainframe data and the processing that it always provides for them and the stability, right? So I think if nothing else, the scariness of last year, right, made them realize we've got to keep our mainframes and we need to take care of them.
Mainframe, hosted mainframe. Oh, mainframe as a service. Interesting. Tim, it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to jump in, but yeah, I think from my perspective and the customers I talked to, there was an initial focus on let's protect the house. Let's make sure what we have is running efficiently. Let's make sure what we have, we're getting the most value out of it. Let's make sure we're protected from a resiliency standpoint. So we saw an uptick in some backup and recovery solutions and some initially, I think when that first hit, but then I saw really an acceleration. What was already happening is that most of the mainframe customers I talk to that are investing in the platform are investing in and internally and changing the culture of their mainframe development teams and wanting to accelerate accessibility of the mainframe, wanting making it more familiar to their development staffs, wanting to modernize how they touch and feel the mainframe. And there's so many different ways you can do that. Some companies are focusing on APIs, but all of them are really focusing on how can we manage the mainframe. It's really like this mainframe that rarely exists on mainframe anymore. Most of our customers are moving to hybrid cloud, where there's some component that's reaching in and accessing that data, interacting with the mainframe in some way. And if they're changing those components and changing the mainframe components, they want to do that in the same way. So I saw a lot of acceleration in companies with DevOps initiatives after that initial first few months of sort of, let's protect the house. And then they thought, well, yeah, okay, the wheels aren't going to fall off. Now, where do we go from here?
I have to say, I think that last year was, I have my mainframe, it runs my business. How do I run it better? How do I run it more effectively? How do I run it more efficiently? How do I address the fact that I need to make changes faster? I need to be able to deliver value faster. I need to be able to address the market. And I think a lot of people who are thinking about moving to the cloud watched their MIPS utilization go up because they needed to handle the load that many of these companies experienced. They could just turn on more capacity, and they did, to manage through this pandemic. And it showed them that they have that ability and that flexibility using the Z system to grow and to shrink as appropriate. They can turn on more capacity when they need it during the right times. And this flexible ability to use the Z as a cloud, which is, wasn't it the first cloud, really? Okay, I've been around a little too long. It's the first cloud we had. Everything was remote. We talked to it. When we think about it, though, a lot of people use that flexibility. And as I said, I work with a lot of clients doing DevOps transformations, and my 2020 was, other than not getting on an airplane a lot, was very busy. And I guess the good thing was, since I didn't have to get on the airplane, I could spend even more time with clients in their transformations. And I'm absolutely seeing customers are seeing huge value by moving to the same processes, practice, culture, and tools that they use in the distributed side. So they don't need something different for the mainframe. They don't have to see that as a different platform. It's, from a development perspective, it's just COBOL. So it really, the process, practice, all of those things, bringing this standardization really has helped improve the speed of delivering at business value and exposing APIs, doing those kinds of things, and understanding that they can take that legacy application, that thing that's been worked on for the last 40 years, and just bring it into a modern pipeline without having to redo it. They didn't have to refactor the application. They can use modern pipelines, modern capability with existing monolithic applications. The other thing I think that's been really good with the pandemic, and there's not much other than I didn't have to get on a plane every week. If we think about it, a lot of people are realizing microservices may not be the right answer for everything. Sometimes the monolith might be the right answer, or somewhere in between. And I think people are starting to recognize, I can't take a performance hit. I need that credit card swipe to happen now. I need that performance to support my digital transformation. And so keeping that high transaction throughput workload on Z connecting into the cloud environments in this hybrid cloud has turned out very well for those customers who have been transitioning and are taking advantage of all of the code they currently have running their backend systems.
Yeah,
go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, just to highlight what Rosalind said, I think working code is gold, and customers that are able to leverage that versus trying to restart from scratch. There was a difference for sure in 2020 that was highlighted between those two things, and it really does put a focus on the fact that if you have something that works, you want to figure out how you can make it work better, not start from scratch.
Absolutely. Something Anna said about customers who maybe were looking at transitioning off mainframe recognized 2020 wasn't the year to do it. But, I guess the question is, listening to all of you, look, people had some choices. They could go to the cloud, they could migrate to the cloud, but that wasn't mutually exclusive with continuing to work with their mainframe. To the contrary, you can tie those two together. And with things like Zoe and open source, we allow you to even use the same tools that you use there, here, and there, which makes it, more even a better deal. But 2020 is behind us. With lessons learned, well, we hope it's behind us, but with lessons learned in 2020, and with everything that open mainframe and Zoe and stuff like this offers us, why? I mean, the idea of transitioning off a mainframe doesn't seem to make any sense. I'm sure you guys think so either, but I mean, it just doesn't seem to make sense. Peter, I'd like to, again, ask you to kick it off. With all of this goodness around open source and the performance that we saw, why wouldn't we see a continuation of what we saw in 2020 here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good
sickness, everything to the side, obviously.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess we're going to edit some of this out. You want to kick off the question again? I kind of lost that thread.
Sure. So why, with everything that we learned in 2020 and with the open source tools and what these trends that we've seen, we're not going to go back to 2019, right? Why would we not continue to deepen the relationship and the functionality between our, let's call it cloud or public cloud infrastructure and our mainframe infrastructure?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, it kind of speaks to, what is 2021 really going to hold for us in terms of mainframe DevOps innovation or integration. I think I've spent a good amount of time in the cloud world and on the distributed side. I know Gartner has published a piece around this, plateau of productivity, kind of claiming that enterprise DevOps has reached maturity, right? When you look at our ability to apply this level of maturity to the mainframe at scale, I think that's yet to be realized. I think in 2021, it's likely that we'll see, what I call an inflection point approaching, where we'll start to see, based on our experience, especially in what we saw in 2020, we'll start to see more mainframe clients take this on, right? But, inflection points really cannot succeed without lowering the barrier for what it means to develop, test, deploy, and run applications on the mainframe. And that's when, what we need to supply to our development teams in order to do that. And that's where you see, the introduction of open interfaces on the mainframe, familiar tools like Rosalind was describing earlier, being able to adapt skills from the distributed side and apply those to the mainframe side is really what we're talking about. Around 90% of developers are using open source tools. So I think that the opportunity is really upon us. Maybe we'll see that in 2021.
Maybe. Anybody, what do you think about 2021?
Obviously, our customers dictate where we go, but I think many of us have enough interaction with them to reasonably predict that we'll see an acceleration of them. And I agree with what Peter said. I don't think we've reached the pinnacle of customers implementing DevOps principles and practices on the mainframe. I think there are many more that continue to go down that journey, and that means looking at open source, making sure that they have access to that open source, it means making sure the developers are using the tools that they're familiar with to interact with the mainframe, whether that be open source. I think there are also some friction points and opportunities for us as software vendors to say there are certain problems that are maybe even not unique to the mainframe, that are still, I think, have solutions that are less than mature. And one of those areas are database changes. For our customers that love a relational database, how can they go and break down the components of those database parts and treat them as code, right? And so there's some open source out there for that. There's some commercial solutions out there for that, but I think there's areas for improvement around that as well on the mainframe. So I think there's going to be continuing involvement. There's going to be continued acceleration, of this desire amongst our customer base to keep down this path.
Let me just say, I disagree with Gartner on this. I don't think we've reached an inflection point on enterprise DevOps. I think, when you look at the crossing the chasm sort of model, we're at best in the early the early major market, that 35%, if you will. I think there's half the market that still not even sure what DevOps is. But that being said, I'm sorry. Steve, did I step on you there? I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. But just to build a little bit on one of the things Tim highlighted, for 2020, I think automation was a key thing that people realized if they didn't have automation, they were dependent on specific resources to accomplish tasks. And with a pandemic going on, that highlights a really big risk. And Tim mentioned database changes. That's a key area. We have DBAs that in a lot of cases are overloaded, and the need for automation and roles like that is key. And connecting it in with a DevOps pipeline is also key. So if you can change your application, 20, 30 times a month, but you can only change your database once a month or once a quarter, you have a problem. You're not going to be able to flow that value out. So I do think that automation is a key thing that is highlighted across this pandemic.
Right, and I'd like to, Steve said, that the customers that we've been talking to and prospects, they're struggling to connect the dots between the mainframe and their open systems. And it's a lot of times, sometimes just because they've left it unmanaged, right? And so they're not only struggling with the concept of it, they're struggling with having the right people on board to help them, right? So we've been talking a lot with people like Dr. Cameron Say and Wolfram Grease, who've been doing mainframe education, right? Getting younger mainframe programmers up into the whole fold here, because those are the ones that are going to bring this energy for DevOps, right? And the new technologies. And boy, do we have to get them educated and brought on board and mentored so they can pick up the knowledge from those experienced people before they decide to retire, right? So that's also playing into the whole struggle as people are shifting into the DevOps and bringing mainframe into that workflow.
Yeah, and it's been a big transformation. And if I look at my 2021 start, it's more customers asking, how do they do and how can they go and what can they do? And I would disagree with anybody that says anybody's down the DevOps path, sort of, because DevOps is a continuous improvement process. Whether or not I'm in distributed or Z, it's continuous improvement. And if I talk to the Kix team, who's been on this for, I don't know, it's 17 years now, they'll say they're still working because they can continuously improve. And I think those organizations that recognize this is continuous improvement, I'm going to take the next small thing, I'm going to improve it, and then I'm going to move on to the next small thing, and I'm going to continue to improve. If they don't get that, then they're not going to get the value out of DevOps. But I think the other thing that's changed is it's not automation anymore. In some ways, it's the step next. How am I doing this in a way that's really bringing value and removing the need for people to do certain things. I can automate a task, but am I automating things such that I can improve my processes? A lot of people started automating existing processes and they don't end up in a much better place. They really need to look at, what's my process? What's the culture? I don't want a DBA doing those simple tasks. Why don't I do infrastructure as code, have that configuration as code sitting in the SEM, and have it deployed through the process? Now the DBAs can focus on performance, understanding how they can better optimize. They can do those kind of things, and the developer can let things flow through the process. Database is just one example. Schedules, all of those kinds of infrastructure as code kinds of things. And this past year, I've had more ops teams in the Z world come to me to talk about, how do I do DevOps in my ops team? And that does make sense, because they are building code. A system programmer should be writing automation to do something rather than doing the something 1,000 times. I watched a client just a few weeks ago show me how they were making changes, and they logged into ISPF and they're, doing the options, and I'm sitting there watching, and I get pings in the background. What's he doing? What's going on there? I'm like, relax. It's the way we used to do it in the 1980s. Let's take that. Let's figure out the right process. Let's expose that as infrastructure as code, and then I can make it flow. And that's the next stage that I see a lot of clients starting to get to use the Z as a service, even if they could turn it over to somebody else to manage, or they could do it themselves and manage it as a service to the rest of their organization.
Agreed. Guys, I want to use the rest of our time to talk a little bit about Zoe. Right? This is a mainframe audience. They've heard of Zoe, obviously. And it, look, as an outsider, an observer, this has been a tremendous success as an open source project, if for no other reason, and that it's brought the mainframe software vendors together in at a common level, much the way CNCF is done with cloud native and all of that stuff. Zoe's really, it's gotten buy-in. It's gotten buy-in from all of you, right? Where do you think the progress is? What needs to be done here next? What's the hype? What's the big priorities for Zoe going forward? Tim, I know you guys are big proponents of it. All of you are, but why don't you kick off if you don't mind, Tim?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, Zoe, we're obviously strong believers in Zoe, and one of its main missions is to make interacting with the mainframe, more familiar and more cloud-like. And you can do that with APIs and CLI. You can do that also with user interfaces. You can do that with the ability to bring APIs together via a gateway. So Zoe offers all of those ways for our customers to sort of modernize the way they interact with the mainframe. And we're also developing commercial software that's leveraging Zoe as its platform for UI in that desktop interface. We're also actively developing or now Zoe is owned by the community, right? So we're just a member. So I think there are a lot of ways that even the community is looking at how can we leverage Zoe internally so that we can help move our customers along or move along those DevOps pipelines. Could Zoe be a portal for self-service with its desktop? With a UI saying, our end users will go there and it's a parking place for those services, or UI, a platform for those services. I've heard a few customers talk about that. Quite honestly, when you talk about the mainframe community, I think some of them haven't even developed a sort of a policy for open source and consumption and how they'll consume it and contribute back. So just, outbreak of honesty. I think some of our customers are at that point in the continuum. And I always say when I get on these forums to say, I think this is something, speaking to that mainframe community on COS, you should be doing that, getting your thought leaders together. How are you consuming open source? How are you supporting that open source? How are you contributing back to that open source? And Zoe is a great place to go look. Ported Tools is a great place to go look. But this is important, for you. And I'm talking about open source running on ZOS. I know open source can run on Z Linux, and that's great. But I'm talking more specifically about open source running on ZOS. So I'd say for those customers that haven't started down this journey, I think it's important, for the future, your mainframe to do that.
Anyone? Rosalind, you have nothing to say on Zoe?
Yeah. I was letting other people go first. If we think about it and we think about the Master the Mainframe competition, the Master the Mainframe competition this year, for the first year, used the ZOS Explorer, used the Open Editor. It used a set of capability to allow those college students, high school students, an interaction with Z that was not log into ISPF and let's go learn. For once, sometimes I talk about it. My son happens to be in college and he did the Master of the Mainframe at one point in time with those ISPF screens sort of giving me a hard time since I started in ISPF development. It's kind of fair. But doing it this year with a modern interface, with VS Code that he already uses, with Git that he already does, that environment that it just works. It's just familiar. So by doing this, we've exposed the mainframe in a much easier way for people to interact with, learn. They don't have to learn that. Okay, it is actually easy to use. ISPF is walk up and use, but okay, they don't want to do that. They've got this modern interface, and that really has helped and open expose Z to even more people. So there were even people doing the Master of the Mainframe this year. And if we look at tools and capabilities, they're being built, APIs into the system so I can add them. All of those things have helped grow. I also think the Zoe, the open mainframe community and Zoe has helped remind people that in the Z world, we've actually been doing open source for a long time. When it first came out, the first comment at Share was, we got that tape that we've been doing for years. Isn't that just open source? Which it is. It just had different licenses. So we've been doing it forever. It just wasn't open source. And by now, bringing it into the true open source community and having Zoe, we get more visibility to the platform and more people not perceiving it as old and out of date, but part of the system. But we do have to be careful about, Zoe is providing a set of modern interfaces. We also have to change the culture and practice and the way we're working with the system. And we don't want to bring something in to make it more complex either. As a user, I can log in using my SSH connection into the system. I can connect in and work on ZOS just like I can on any other platform. There are lots of things I can do, so we need to make sure we're giving people an understanding of all of the options they have, all of the different choices they have to interact with the system, making it easier, while also remembering the platform does have some differences that we're gonna keep, like workload management, like the fact that it's got whatever the current hardware is at 7 nines now in availability. Keep all those abilities and all that kind of thing, and remove the having to work with the system differences. Let's make that interface consistent so that I can work with it, and then I can start to learn all the special things that the platform has that makes it why everybody runs those high throughput transaction processing systems on it.
Cool. Anna, Peter, Steve, any comments on Zoe?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Alan. I think it's clear Zoe is behind, a number of things which have tremendous value to the platform. I think when you look at the integration perspective, and talk maybe about what it means to have an open first set of principles, Zoe is clearly behind the idea that mainframe software delivery should be no different than other platforms. I mean, the example that Rosalind just gave and some of the other folks have been talking about, it's clear, you're not going to really be able to do that consistently with any other technology. And, obviously getting a few key vendors together to sponsor, the initiation of that activity is key. I think, obviously open source solutions have far greater value than closed proprietary solutions because they offer freedom of choice of tooling. We've talked about that a good bit. And then there's this notion that, long-term viability of the platform, long-term viability of this integration potential, it's really only possible if you're working as a community. So, we're obviously very invested in Zoe as being one of the co-founders of the project. Very encouraged by what we're seeing with some new vendors joining in. We're investing heavily in what it means to open up the interfaces to our offerings. I think, across the board, as we see that more and more, you'll just see that sort of groundswell or that inflection point that we highlighted earlier.
Great.
I'll add is Zoe's, it's definitely an interesting technology, something that, we've looked at the community around that. I think Tim and Peter highlighted, where it's at in terms of, widespread adoption. We've looked at it in a sense where we want to be able to solve people's problems today, now. As that technology matures, it's certainly something interesting, but we're looking at it from a sense of how can we solve a customer's problem today, and how can we do that in, Rosalind highlighted, how can we do that in the simplest way? So it's, I think there's some really interesting things there if, the technology is widespread and adopted. Looking at our REST APIs that we've already provided, looking at mediation layer for that, certainly things that are interesting. But what we haven't seen today is widespread, I'll call production use of Zoe.
Hopefully we'll see that
Probably.
change. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I agree. Hopefully we will see that change. I agree with you, Alan. But we're seeing kind of the same thing, that there's slower adoption of that. And I think it's just maybe we've got more of a customer base that's been slower to adopt some of this new stuff. And so as they come forward, it's important to us that we're part of the Zoe project so that, as they start asking us about it, we're ready for them. Right. And we can help lead them into that newer space and help provide them thought leadership so that they can make that transition.
Fantastic. Guys, believe it or not, I once had a sales manager who told me the problem with the Fortune 500 was there were only 500 of them. And so he only had 500 potential customers. The problem with doing a panel with 5 people is there's 5 of you, and it giving everyone a chance to chat. Our time goes quickly, so our time is about up. Thank you all very, very much for participating in today's panel. Thank you all for your company sponsorship of today's event. We're one of the few media companies that are really focusing on DevOps and mainframe and transitions and all of this. And things like Zoe, and it's important. It's important to our audience. There is a big audience out there for this. So keep up the great work. Thank you for joining us. This is Alan Schimmel for Media Ops. Enjoy the rest of the event today, everyone.